Hello, everyone. My name's Rob Shestak, and I'll be your host for this episode. And we come to you on these podcasts to talk about various things in employee benefits, insurance, human resources, compliance, a whole bunch of different things. And with us today, we have a very special person who's been a friend for a long time, who I consider by far the foremost expert on Medicare. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is Medicare. And just to give you a little bit of background on Rick, he is president of Solofsky Financial Group, going on 30 years. He's been a 35-year veteran in the insurance and employee benefits vertical. He is a national speaker on Medicare and long-term care. He is a published author of several books, and Rick is also an alumni of Westchester University. Go Rams, go Golden Rams. My son went there, so we have that connection. And Rick is also a very avid Philadelphia sports fan. And I said this in prior episodes with Rick. There's a radio station here called 94.1 WIP Sports Radio, talk show all about Philly sports. Rick is on there more than anybody I know. I've been up late on a Saturday night at 2 a.m. and I hear, "This is Rick from Pennsylvania" or something. And they're like, "Hey, Rick, how you doing?" And he's rarely wrong, and he always gives amazing insight. So when Rick retires, it wouldn't surprise me if the Eagles hire him as a strategic advisor. But anyway, today we were here to talk about Medicare and how to enhance your understanding of the federal program, enrollment, benefits, supplemental benefit options, do's and don'ts, and so forth. So before we begin, I always like to start an episode out with some statistics because it kind of pulls everything in together. There are over 65 million people in the United States that are enrolled in Medicare. That represents more than 25% of the 258 million U.S. adults enrolled in Medicare. Unbelievable. So 25% of U.S. adults are enrolled in Medicare. That's a big number. Wouldn't you say, Rick?
Rob, as a matter of fact, by the year 2029, it's amazing I'm going to say this, 5 years from now, Rob, 2029, we're going to have over 105 to 110 million Americans on Medicare, or age 65, I should say. And think about that. That's almost 1/3 of the population of our country. Anybody born between 46 and 64. You invert those numbers, just like the Phillies won the World Series in 1980 and 08. So 08 and 80 were inverted. If you were born in 46 up to 64, those are the baby boomers. And just think about that, Rob. 1/3 of our population is going to be age 65 or older 5 years from now.
Oh, so that's crazy because I'm a numbers guy, if people know me. Medicare came out what year?
1963, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson.
So Medicare has been around for 61 years.
Yes.
61 years. But in the next 5 years, we're going to double what we did in those 65 years.
Because of the baby boomers, because when everybody came back at the end of the war in 46, what are you going to do with your loved one? We don't have to get into that, right? And everybody, they didn't just have one baby. Everybody had families of 2 and 3. Things were different back then. Things didn't cost what they do now. But Rob, here, you're a numbers guy. Do the math. 10,000 people a day, not a month. 10,000 people a day turn 65.
And here's another statistics that I saw. I believe it was on CMS. It was 7.7 million people on Medicare are under the age of 65.
Yes.
And so everybody thinks 65 Medicare. It's not. It can happen.
65 is not even the important number. We're going to get into that when you start asking me questions. I'll just give a preview. 65 is the least important number, because if you're 45 or you're 55 and you're going to get approved for Social Security disability, 24 months later, you have to apply for Medicare Part B. But on the flip side of that, there are people that are working full time, and we'll get into this. And if they have more than 20 employees at that business, they do not have to apply for Medicare. And people are doing this every day because they're afraid of that penalty. And we'll get into that later when you start asking questions. So people are signing up and they don't even have to, because you don't have to sign up when you're 65 if you work for a group of 20 or more employees. So I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag. That's why the number 20 is more important than the number 65. On all my handout, on my seminars I do with people nationally, I tell them, focus on how many employees work at your business. You do not have to apply if they have more than 20. And why that's important, Rob, is we have an aging workforce. We have more people working to age 70 and 75 than we ever did before.
So an interesting question would be, if I turn 65, the government's not going to come in and say, okay, we're enrolling you in Medicare, here's your ID card. So not just setting up for age 65, not just deciding if I want to take my Social Security then or delay it, but it's not going to be automatic. They're not just going to do it for me.
Nope.
But they know that I'm 65.
The proactive event you were talking about when we get into A and B, you might get your Medicare Part A card, because what happens is the government has your Social Security number. Did you ever see your parents, because you're not 65 yet, Rob, when you get close to 65, Sarah, you're years from 65, but when you turn 63, just like that ARP card comes to you when you're 50, someone knows you're 50, someone knows you're 65, you'll start getting bombarded with literature about Medicare supplements and Medicare Advantage plans. But you might get your Part A card, because Part A is an entitlement. We'll get into that. But Part B is a proactive event. You must apply, because they don't know what your employment situation is, and they even know less how many employees work where you are working at. So we'll get into how you avoid the penalty if you stay on the plan but beyond age 65, because there are penalties and there are limits to enroll. But I'll wait. We'll do this in an organized fashion.
No, that's great information. I remember when my wife turned 50, I figured, hey, start saving for retirement, not saving for retirement, but getting discounts on travel or whatever. So I signed her up for like this lifetime subscription for AARP, and she almost divorced me for it.
Yeah.
So when the AARP stuff comes in the mail, she throws it out because she doesn't. Anyway,
that's funny.
You mentioned, gosh, there's so many nomenclatures in our business. Permanent life, whole life, FSA, HRA, HSA, COBRA, ERISA, all these FMLA, they do mean something at the end of the day. And even a lot of professionals don't know what they know what they mean, but they don't know what they mean from a legal standpoint. So you mentioned some things that were very simple. A, B, I know there's a C, a D. Is there E, F, G? I mean, do we use the whole alphabet and then go to the Greek alphabet? What do we do? So what are the differences between all these Medicare Part alphabet layers, A, B, C,
Chapter
D?
4 in my Medicare book says Medicare A to D. So it's not Medicare A to Z, it's Medicare A to D. And there's only 4 letters that people should be aware of. So let's just dive into it. Medicare Part A is that entitlement. Once you turn 65, this is where people get confused. People will call me up and say, I have Medicare. And I say, take a picture of your card and send it to me. It just says Medicare Part A. You'll get your Part A card sometimes without even applying, Robert. It doesn't mean you're in Medicare. It just means that you're entitled. Everybody pays Medicare taxes at their place of business. Without getting too far into the woods, what happens is you turn 65 because part of your taxes, you have FICA, you have federal, state, local, and you have a Medicare tax. That is paying for Medicare Part A. So there's no cost to A, no monthly cost to A. And it's an entitlement. And Part A just covers, people get confused. They call it hospitalization and they think surgeries, since it's done in a hospital, are covered under A. It's not. Medicare Part A is just the hospital bed and the hospital room only. Whatever happens in the hospital bed, and it covers your hospital bed, hospital room. It's like you and your wife go on vacation, you buy a hotel room, you're paying, it's room and board in a hospital, same as a vacation hotel. It's your bed, it's your room only.
That's a great point. So Medicare Part A is basically lodging, room and bed. That's it. You go to a hotel, you got to pay for the internet, you got to pay for your food, you got to pay for parking, but your hotel room is covered. That's
correct.
It.
As long as you work for 10 years, which is 40 quarters. I don't know why they break it down to 40 quarters, but they do. Your Part A comes to you at no cost.
And what people have to know is if you are a W-2 employee, there's two parts to the Medicare tax. It's 1.45%. That's paid by you as the employee on all your wages. It used to be capped, but now it's on all your wages. And if your wages go above a certain point, it's even higher than 1.45%. And then your employer matches it. So the total is 2.9%. If you're self-employed, you have to pay both sides of that tax. So think about it. You make $100,000 or on $100,000, $2,900 a year over your lifetime, and just say no inflation or anything, over 40 years, that's a lot of money. You're paying over hundreds of thousands of dollars for room and board.
Well, don't forget, it's a big benefit because if you ever got an itemized bill from your EOB, explanation of benefits, you would be shocked at what it cost one day in the hospital. And it's only a $1,642 deductible. So depending on how often we run these podcasts in 2005, that's going to change. But right now it's $1,682 per admission deductible. But after that, everything's covered 100%. Rob, you could generate a $150,000 bill 1 week in the hospital. All that is paid for after a $1,642 annual deductible. I mean, a one-time admission deductible. So that's a big benefit.
Does that include ICU?
ICU and
Okay.
hospital. Once you're in the brick and mortar of a hospital, Medicare will cover that up to 100 days typically. And there are extensions, but yeah, so just think about it. It's a lot of money you're paying, but that could be eaten up if you're in a hospital for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, $3,000 to $10,000 a day, depending on where you're at and what type of you're in, whether it's ICU or CCU, it gets expensive. So Part A, that's great. So I think we all have a far better understanding of Part A, because I got to tell you, that was good for me, and we've been in this business together for 30 something years.
Sure.
So A, great. Now let's get to the next alphabet letter is Medicare Part B.
So if you work for a company of 20 or more employees, you hold all the cards. A lot of people don't know that. If you are 65, if you are 70, and your group plan is excellent, large corporations have great benefits, you may want to stay on the group plan as long as you're employed and your wife. Sometimes your wife is 5 years younger. Sometimes your wife is 5 years older, depending on the situation. So it may behoove you to really drill down and find out, am I better off staying on the group plan? But here's what happens, Rob. You have neighbors, you have relatives, they know it all. They come out of the woodwork and they're going to tell you, oh no, you have to apply or you're going to get a penalty. That used to happen to our parents, Rob, because the average person 40, 50 years ago, they retired at 65. Do you know why retirement age You know why Medicare started at 65 and they started all the retirement plans to start at 65? Because you usually passed away at age 70 and they wanted to give you at least 5 more years of quality of life before you passed away. That surely has changed now. We have a paradigm shift. I mean, we're in an election year this year, and nobody talks about it, but be honest with you, age 65 is too young. When someone passes away and you say they were 72, what's the first thing you say?
That's young.
Yes. So actually, we could save the company, the government a lot of money. You may not get elected. Medicare should start at age 70 because most people now are working well past their age 70. So not to get too far into the weeds, make sure, folks, that if you're working for a company of more than 20 employees, you can go into Medicare Part B and get a supplement and get off your company group plan. A lot of my clients do that. But if you have a great plan, Rob, don't apply for Medicare Part B because right now it costs $174.70 a month. People are signing up for it, Rob, because they think they're going to get a penalty. You're giving the government $174 a month. And trust me, they're not going to give that back to you. They're not going to tell you, you should not be paying us this money if you didn't get a supplement. They don't know that you're staying on the group plan. So please, folks, listening to this podcast, be careful, call somebody, call a professional, call the HVBA, and we'll walk you through what's the right thing to do when you turn 65. And then there's a special form. We won't get into the weeds today. We'll do it in other podcasts. That you have a special form your employer will fill out for you when you're age 75. You don't get a penalty from age 65 to 75. It's 10% penalty if you don't sign up for Part B when you should have. And that form, Rob, you probably heard the word credible coverage before. That's what that form does. And that gets you out from paying the penalty. Because remember, we said it earlier, the government doesn't know how many employees work where you're at. So Medicare Part B, there's a couple pieces to it. It costs $174.70 a month. But if you make more, I'm going to round off for the podcast. If you make more than $90,000 a year, or if you file single, if you file with a wife jointly, and you're over $185,000 a year, you will have something called an IRMA surcharge, IRMAA. That's income related to Medicare income. And the more you make, you're going to pay more than $174. So that's on the cost end. You could pay up to $600, Rob, if you're making over $700,000 as a household. There's a lot to it. But just to keep it simple today, that's the cost of Medicare Part B. And what does it cover? It covers everything medically necessary. It's not going to cover that nose job you're thinking of getting next year. That's elective surgery. It's covering everything medically necessary, but it only covers 80% of all expenses. Remember, that happen outside of the hospital bed, outside of a hospital room. That hotel, we said. Part B covers doctor visit, specialist, surgeries, inpatient, outpatient, not prescription drugs. We'll get into that later. That's what Part B does, but it only covers 80%, and it's got a $240 deductible this year. That's why you want to get a supplement, which we'll get into later, because think about it, Rob. Surgeries fall under Part B. If you have a $500,000 surgery, you're going to be liable for 20% of that. That's why people buy supplements.
So there's no maximum out of pocket on that?
No maximum out of pocket with Medicare.
Wow, interesting. Now, what happens if I work for an employer and either they're under 20 lives or they don't offer health insurance at all?
Then you have to apply for Part B if you're under 20 lives. It's actually like COBRA. It's funny. COBRA and Medicare are similar. If you're 19 or less, You don't offer COBRA. New Jersey and Pennsylvania both have a 9-month COBRA, but not your normal 18-month COBRA with group insurance. If you're over 20, you don't have to apply. If you're under 20, you better apply. And Rob, this is another reason why we have this podcast. You want to say wow? Where do you see this wow factor? You call the Social Security office. That's where you sign up, ssa.gov. ssa.gov, just to say it again. And you call them and say, I'm covered on a group plan. They're not trained. You know, I really wish sometimes CNN, Fox, and 60 Minutes listens to these podcasts. Because if we were on national TV, we would have people running to their phones Monday morning if it was 60 Minutes on a Sunday night show. Very important. If you have less than 19 employees and you call the Social Security office, sometimes they're not educated, Rob. And you've heard the horror stories. And they'll say, oh, you're covered on your group plan? What do you hear this, Sarah? If you don't apply for Medicare and you are only on the group plan and you have a $500,000 surgery, the hospital reserves the right, the insurance company, Blue Cross, Aetna, reserves the right to only cover, get this, guys, 20% of the claim as if you applied for Medicare. That means you're responsible for 80% of that claim. Think about that.
Wow.
I knew
Wow.
you'd say that.
Wow. Well, I do have a deal for you. You pay me $700,000 a year, and I'll pay you $600 back for insurance.
Yeah, it's amazing. So that's part B in a nutshell. So there is a very big necessity.
All right. So if we're to say part A and B, because most people know that, so keep it simple, wrap it up. Part A and B together is basically major medical insurance as we know it. Yes. It's, let's just say, $174.70 a month. We'll say that, but it's 20% of whatever the bill is. $1 million bill, you're paying 200 grand. Period. So that's the kicker, right? So now how do we protect that exposure? We'll get into in a second. Now we have this next letter in the alphabet, Medicare Part Charlie. Yep. So Medicare Part C.
And those commercials that we see that are on TV all the time, there's two commercials. I use my my remote when I'm watching Fox. Mike Lindell selling sheets and slippers, right? You know that guy in Minnesota?
Oh yeah.
It's Medicare Advantage commercial. They should be tarred and feathered. And this is why I wrote the book, because from that movie Network, I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore. I couldn't take it. Medicare Part C is a Medicare Advantage plan. You've heard of Medicare Advantage. And those commercials, William Shatner, George Foreman, JJ Jimmy Walker, it's free, George Foreman, Joan London, they're all people that are on those commercials. And those a couple, hey, Hank, how come we don't have Medicare Part C? Well, Mary, I think we should get Medicare Part C because it'll cover dental, it'll cover vision. We're missing out. Medicare Part C is a Medicare Advantage plan, and you want to be very careful. I'm not saying it's bad. You want to be careful because a Medicare Advantage plan has a lot of pitfalls. If you're hospitalized, we'll get into that later. And it's one of my biggest pet peeves in this business. That commercial should not be on TV because it's trying to get people to buy an Advantage plan. We'll get into why an Advantage plan was invented in the first place. Remember, all this stuff we're talking about, Rob, A and B, who funds A and B? This is a very important part of this podcast. The government funds A and B. So the White House is paying all those claims for A and B. And they eventually found a way to get out from those claims. And we'll get into that later. That's a Medicare Advantage plan. That's the letter C.
Okay, so I don't need C. I don't need the Medicare Advantage plan because it's kind of like, it's like a false sense of security.
It's really not a bad plan, but the problem is You have copays for doctors and visits, not a big deal. A small copay for outpatient surgery, again, not a big deal. But they never tell you on the commercial what happens when I'm hospitalized. And when
Okay, let's do
Medicare
that.
Advantage, yes,
So we have that $1 million claim we talked about,
yes,
right? And under A and B, I got to pay 20% of that, or 200 grand. Forget about deductibles and all that. 200,000.
right.
Where does the Advantage Plan Part C protect me on that, if at
Protects
all?
you. It protects you because if you're hospitalized, you will pay $110 to $150 per day in the hospital. So that's a lot less than you would normally pay for that 20%. And the surgeries are included. And you could pay up to 7 days, which is anywhere between $1,200 to $1,800 per admission until you pay $8,000 out of pocket, because that Medicare Advantage plan has an out of pocket. What happens is when you buy a Medicare Advantage plan, you are now out of the government's pocket. That is why an Advantage plan was invented in the first place. And it's one of my, again, pet peeves that I'm going to start doing more of these podcasts, because people don't understand the reason why Medicare Advantage plans were invented in the first place is George Bush, the son, George Bush's administration. It's in the book that I wrote. They got all the insurance companies together because his financial advisor said, Mr. President, we got to figure out a way to get the government out of the claims business. So what happens was, Rob, they invited all the top insurance companies. You know them: Humana, Blue Cross, ARP, which is United Healthcare, and Monty Hall, let's make a deal. The government made a deal with all the carriers. They said, if you pay us $1,000 a month on behalf of a person that buys a Medicare Advantage plan, we'll take care of the claim. Why did the government do that? They did that. I'm glad you're sitting down, Rob. You know what the average Medicare Part B claim, Part A and B claim cost the government get this, per month?
Less than $1,000.
$10,000 to $15,000
More than
a month.
Yeah.
That's why the government made a deal. They rather pay $1,000 now than actuarially be responsible for $15,000 per senior. Remember, in 5 years, we're going to have 1/3 of our country in Medicare. So the government did a real smart thing by inventing the Medicare Advantage plan. People, make sure you caregivers from our other podcast of caregivers, make sure your parents are not calling that toll-free number and just signing up, or take the TV out of their house. I'm being facetious now. Be careful. A Medigap policy, which I have, which you're going to have, Rob, covers everything 100%, everything 100% after you pay that $240 Part B deductible. You want to try to be in a Medigap policy first, because financially there's no surprises on the back end. That's a lot to ask, by the way.
Is that Medigap also called a supplement?
It's called a supplement, yes.
Okay.
So you have Medicare Advantage,
yeah.
You have a supplement, correct.
So we'll get to that in a second. So what you're saying is, I sign up for an Advantage plan. Let's just say it costs me nothing. It's free. JJ Walker says it's free. The government will pay whomever I bought it from. And we talked about the big carriers, which, if you're not familiar with it, they're called the BUCA plans, BUCAH, which is Blue Cross, United Healthcare, Cigna, Aetna, Humana. So they call them BUCA plans. So I enroll with one of them. And as soon as I do that, the government's sending them $1,000 a month.
Also, $174, sorry, the $174 you pay for Medicare Part B, that goes to the insurance company also.
Okay, so they're getting almost $1,200 a month, $14,400 a year.
Yes.
I'm okay for 2 years. That comes out to 28 grand. But they know at the end of the day, they're banking all that money into reserves, hoping that if I do get sick, it's not going to be more than what they're getting paid.
Correct.
Are any of those carriers losing money on that deal?
Well, they say they are the Medicare Advantage plans because Where do you see this statistic? Because you're a numbers guy. Up until 2 years ago, there was only 11% of the seniors were in a Medicare Advantage plan. But due to those commercials now, we're up to 55%. The Advantage carriers did not expect they were going to have all those Advantage plans bought and sold.
Does that almost become adverse selection?
Not really, because remember, they're getting all this premium. And right now, you probably have 40 million Americans that are in an Advantage plan. They're not paying 40 million claims a day. So they're still making out. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew by setting the bar at $1,000 a month, plus the Medicare Part B premium, they have enough reserves, enough money coming in. But let's not forget about something else that really bothers me. What happened in 2020, Rob? COVID. Nobody talks about this. Do you know how many seniors passed away from 2020 to 2024, the last 4 years? 1.2 million seniors passed away due to COVID. You do the math. If the average claim is $15,000 a month times 1.2 million people, you're talking about close to $4 billion a year that the government no longer has to pay in Medicare claims, plus no more Social Security checks. They passed away. So for those people that are concerned, is Social Security going to go bankrupt? Not since COVID hit, because all that money now is not being paid out and nobody's talking about it. But we are on the HVBA podcast.
We did not practice that. That is a very interesting point, that everybody thinks Social Security is going to blow up very quickly, but you just gave a very valid point.
Government has just saved $12 billion since 2020 in Medicare claims and Social Security checks not being paid out anymore. Think about it. Do the math.
Wow. So the second part, the part B of Part C, the second part is this Medigap supplement plan.
Yeah.
So basically that is far better than the Advantage plan. It closes pretty much every gap, but there is a cost to that.
Yeah, I use a lot of motifs, movie motifs, Godfather, Wizard of Oz. Remember when Dorothy, you better get this right, when Dorothy left Munchkin Land with her Medicare Part B A and B card? Think about it. Who's the first character she came to in The Wizard of Oz? You only saw it 150,000 times. The Scarecrow, right? And the road split in two. You'll like this, Sarah. The road split in two, right? Remember? You can go left or you can go right. Remember? You can either go Medicare Advantage, which has a zero premium plan, but it has large hospital exposure, or you can go the other road to the Wizard of Oz and get a Medigap. That's the easiest way to remember it. The road split. So now all your listeners are going to remember the Wizard of Oz associated to Medicare. But it makes it easier, Rob. There's a cost for Medigaps, and that'll cost anywhere between $130 a month, depending on the state that you're in, as high as $170 a month for males. Males are more expensive than females, actuarially speaking. So a Medigap will cost you between $130 and $170 a month. But think of the peace of mind. With a Medigap, you know all your fixed costs. You know you're only going to pay $240 and you're done paying out of pocket.
So I'm putting it in reality, 175 plus 130, roughly $300 a month, and I basically have 100% medical coverage.
Correct.
Not a bad deal.
Except for the last alphabet letter, Part D, which is your drug plan.
Right.
That was a whole different podcast. But just for the listeners, for keep it simple today, Part D is your drug plan. So those are your 4 letters, A, B, C, D, that are associated with Medicare.
Is Part D something you have to enroll in separately, or is if you?
Absolutely. If you buy a Medicare Advantage plan, a drug plan comes with it, along with dental, along with vision. You buy a Medigap, You're on your own for dental. You're on your own for vision. The optometrist visit is covered, but not the hardware, not the glasses, not the lenses, not the frames, but hardware. And with a Medigap policy, you have to buy a separate drug plan. And if you don't, for those of you listening, if you have no prescriptions right now, touch wood, I have no prescriptions, and I'm 66, you still have to buy a drug plan. Pardon me, because there's a 1% penalty for every month you don't buy a drug plan after you turn 65, unless you're in a credible plan, in a group plan with more than 20 employees.
What's the cost of a Part D plan?
You can pay something as low as 50 cents a month. Believe it or not, one of the carriers out there is WellCare. Believe it or not, 50 cents a month. Can you believe that? And generics are covered at $0 to $1 copays. But sometimes if you have some really heavy diabetic medications, and now you know the government capped insulin at $35, there's other areas of that we won't get into today, which we really have to talk to on other podcasts about the caps and the credible coverage, but that's not important now. But sometimes you might need a $90 or $105. Some of these Highmark drug plans, you may have to get a $95 drug plan depending on your list of medications. You always want to send your agents the medication and the dosages so they can put you in the appropriate Medicare Part D drug plan.
So real quick, and then
Yes.
we want to go to break to recognize some of our sponsors. On the insulin, that $35 cap, that $35 cap that the government set was only for Medicare. It was not for all medical prescription programs in the country. It was only for the Medicare piece.
For Medicare drug plans.
Right. That's it.
Medicare,
so if I'm on a private plan, there is no $35 cap. There could be, but there's not something regulated by the government.
And along with that, they put a $2,000 out-of-pocket maximum on all drug plans.
On Part D.
Just happened, yes.
Oh, is that good? That's good.
It's great for the
Okay.
people that take those kind of prescriptions. And that happened as of August. That just got passed in Congress.
Wonderful. Rick, let's hold that thought.
Sure.
When we come back, we're going to get with Sarah. We have some questions from folks around the country. We do want to recognize some of our sponsors during our break, and we'll be right back with you, and we got you covered. See you shortly. Okay, now we're going to go back. Okay. Welcome back to We Got You Covered. My name is Rob Shestak. I'm your host for this podcast. We have had the pleasure of speaking with Rick for a little bit about Medicare and understanding the enrollment process, the alphabet soup, Part A, B, C, D. And I got to tell you, in this business for 35 years, I've learned some things on here, which is amazing. And really, Rick, you're the foremost expert on this. And we've had some listeners across the country. So let's go into some of the questions before we end our program. So I'll turn it over to Sarah Hunt, who is Senior Vice President at the Health and Voluntary Benefits Association, and she's been monitoring the questions that have been coming in. So Sarah, welcome, and let's start with the first question.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Lots of great questions. So we got first one, Angela with Newark, New Jersey. Says, my mother is 72 years old and she has a Medicare Advantage plan and the rehabilitation facility is not in network. Can I move her back to a Medicare supplement plan and get her out of her current Medicare Advantage plan?
How much time do we have, Robert? Amazing. This is why I said before the break, get the TV out of your parents' homes. Don't let them call that 800 number. Rob, there's something, and Sarah, there's something that people need to be aware of. When you turn 65 and you buy a Medicare Advantage plan, 6 months after your 65th birthday, or 6 months after you eventually sign up for Medicare, remember, people that work for large companies can stay at age 70. Once you turn 65, 6 months goes by, and you have a Medicare Advantage plan, you can't go back to a Medigap unless you pass medical underwriting. This is not subject to the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act law, Robert.
Wow.
You can be declined. So if you have a parent and they have, write these down, folks, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, or breathing problems, sleep apnea or asthma, or they're on some diabetic medications, they will be automatic knockout questions and they are stuck in a Medicare Advantage plan for the rest of their lives. So please be aware. If you can hold on to that Medigap policy, remember, Rob, we talked about it last segment, there's a higher cost to that. You can buy a real inexpensive Medicare Advantage plan, but that's a better network. And that's where the person's having a problem. A lot of these Medicare Advantage plans, now you have a network. What we didn't talk about before the break was in a Medigap policy. This is why you're going to get a Medigap policy, Rob. You do not have a network. Just as long as your doctor takes Medicare, you can go to any doctor in the country. So if you buy a Medigap policy for $130, $160, whatever the cost is, and you find out a doctor in San Diego is doing phenomenal things with a certain ailment you might have, you can get on a plane and go see that doctor in California. If you live in Jersey or Pennsylvania, and you're still going to be only subject to that $240 deductible, and everything's covered after that. So that's the real luxury of having a Medigap. If you have a Medicare Advantage plan, now you have networks, and some facilities are not in network. Rob, I can't tell you how many millennials and people in their 40s and 50s that are calling me, why is my mother, why is my father in a Medicare Advantage plan? How can I get them out? Sometimes you can't. So please be very careful and watch what your parents are doing. We need more active caregivers, Rob.
But, and let's go back. I agree with you 100% on the supplement versus the advantage, and not even second guessing which one you need to go to, but it is $100 and something a month, and a lot of folks are on a fixed income. If somebody can't afford the supplement or Medigap, then at least an advantage plan gives them protection at a much lower to zero cost.
Absolutely. You want to have one or the other. And listen,
Okay.
I believe all agents out there should sell both. The problem is, I'm a broker that does group insurance and Medicare. A lot of brokers do not do both, and you'll attest to that. I'm either going to be a group broker, or I'm going to be a Medicare broker. I decided to be a little crazy, and I decided to do both. I'm a group broker first. I'm a Medicare expert second. I taught myself Medicare because it helped my group save a lot of money because of that aging workforce thing. Remember, Rob, if you work for me and you're 72 and I want to hire you because Sarah is not a reliable millennial, I'm just having fun now. But Rob, you cost me $1,200 a month to be on my group plan. I want you to be in Medicare and a supplement, but it's going to save me $10,000 per person per year. That's what helped me build my business. So, but if you're over 20, you can't coerce employees to jump onto Medicare. You're not allowed to. But under 19, you better be in a Medigap policy. But yeah, Rob, you got to be very careful. But I tell people, if you're on a real fixed income, at least take a Medicare Advantage plan. Because it's a lot more affordable. If you can't afford it, you can't afford it. And people that are really, really healthy and people that have very little money, fixed budget, they're better off in a Medicare Advantage plan. But you definitely want to have one or the other. Yes.
Okay, so let me just wrap this up and then we'll go to another quick question. So if I'm in a advantage plan and I want to go to a supplement plan, there is an underwriting. I get that. How about if I'm in a supplement plan and I can no longer afford it, can I move into an advantage plan?
Yes. Every October 15th, write this down, through December 7th. Can't forget that, Pearl Harbor Day. Every October 15th to December 7th is Medicare Advantage open enrollment. So if you get to a point where your Medigap is costing you $400 or $500 a month, because they will increase every year. The monthly premium will increase once a year. you can always have a fallback plan and go into a Medicare Advantage plan, but I would suggest doing that when you absolutely cannot afford a Medigap anymore. Great point, great question.
Thank you, Rick. Sarah, next question.
So Neil from Billings, Montana asks, my wife is 67 and she applied for Medicare 2 years ago. She's decided to go back to work full-time. What are her options? Can she disenroll out of Medicare, cancel her supplement plan, and go back to on the group plan? What are the advantages and or disadvantages involved in this move?
Wow, Rob, they're hearing us from Montana. That's great. Excellent question. It happens a lot. You can disenroll out of Medicare if you want to go back to a group plan, especially if they have more than 20 employees. Remember, make sure that company, Mr. Neal in Billings, make sure that company you're moving to is over 20 employees, because you should not disenroll if you have if you have 19 or less employees, but you can go back to a group plan if you want to, and then you can reapply for Medicare when you want to retire again. So that's a great question, great point. You can disenroll in both, and there are no penalties for going back and forth.
All right, curveball time.
Sure.
So I thought of this with going through it. So you know me, my mind is crazy, and I always ask some really bizarre questions. But here's my question. Let's go back with a part of what Neil was talking about. So they're in Medicare, they're in an Advantage plan. Then they go back to work, they come out of that plan, they go into the group health plan. Now they ended up quitting their job and they said, yeah, I want to retire. Now they can go back on Medicare. Can they go back onto the Advantage plan without medical underwriting?
You don't go on.
Or are they kind of screwed?
Remember, there's no underwriting for Medicare Advantage plans. Keep that in mind.
I'm sorry, I meant the supplement.
The supplement. Okay, because people will have medical underwriting going back into, I know where you're going because I've known you for a long time. I know where your mind was going. They don't track that you had a Medicare Advantage plan at one point. Well, the last chapter of my book is called The Fountain of Youth. And I called it The Fountain of Youth for a reason. Somebody that turns 70 or 75 and they went back to work, let's say 67, like this gentleman from Billings did, and you come off the group plan, it's like you turn 65 years old all over again. Thus why I named it The Fountain of Youth. So now, if you want to pick up 10 extra years of life, do this and you'll turn from 75 and you'll be 65 years old all over again. And that's a good way of getting into a Medigap policy. And the reason why I put this chapter in, Rob, long story short, I had two separate attorneys and CPAs called me up, different years. One was 5 years from the other one. Similar situation. Wait till you hear this, Rob. You know how you have early retirement and people can go on a severance package and they want to get these older people to go retire out, put them out to pasture, but they put them out to pasture at 64 and a half years old. You're going to love this. So at 64 and a half, both these people were retired. They were given COBRA for 2 years, free COBRA. Who doesn't want to have free COBRA, right? Everybody wants to have free COBRA on a severance package. So both of these people turned 65 6 months later. And when you turn 65 and you're on COBRA, even if you have more than 20 employees, you have to apply for Part B. But these were both CFOs, Rob, and they did not. They're sitting back, they're on the beach. I got free health insurance. Now I'm 67. My COBRA is up. Now I want to apply for Medicare, and it's April or May, and they're being told, sorry, you missed the open enrollment window for Medicare. You should have signed up within 8 months of when your COBRA started. Well, I didn't know that. So now they can't sign up for Part B until the following year, January. So what are they going to do without health insurance for 8 months? So what did I tell them to do? What did I tell them to do?
Move to a country that has national health care.
No, close. I thought of this, and I must have had your brain, because you would have thought of this. Go back to your company, since they dropped the ball and never told you about this. Tell them to rehire you for 30 days, go back on the group plan, and then come off the group plan. It's like it started all over again. That's why I call it the fountain of youth. They're still going to get their penalty. They're still going to get their 10% penalty because they missed their open enrollment, but at least they have health care. By the way, both CFOs, one had diabetes, one had cancer, and they would have had claims out the wazoo if we didn't save them and give them that idea.
What's that 10% penalty paid on? Your gross net income, premium?
No, it's a 10% penalty on Medicare Part B premiums.
So they got to pay $17.
Yes, for the rest of your life, or whatever, however high Medicare Part B would get.
So even if they reset, they're still involved with that penalty?
Rest of your life, yes.
So even that fountain of youth, I did it, now I reset, and even if I go through all this again, I get what the Advantage plan, whatever, I'm going to have to, whatever I'm paying is going to be $17 higher plus increases for the next 20, 30 years.
Correct, because remember, the government knows when you turn 65 and they know you didn't have a credible plan. Remember that special form we talked about? That special form gets you out of that penalty, and you can't get that special form signed because you didn't have credible coverage all the way through up until the date you're reapplying for Medicare. You'll get the penalty, but we didn't care about the penalty. They cared about not having coverage because both gentlemen had to have very expensive surgeries during that period. They had to wait to get on Medicare, so it saved them financially.
There's millions of people that are eligible for Medicare and don't know it.
Absolutely.
So how are they getting penalized? As soon as they do enroll?
No, you know when they get penalized? When they need to have the coverage and they don't have it. That's when they get penalized, and they find out the hard way. Good question.
Sarah, let me see. I'm looking at some of the questions here. I think we answered one of these from Mark Dallas. Let's go to, oh, this is a good one. How about the Lisa question? Lisa from Pittsburgh?
Yep. So Lisa from Pittsburgh asks, I own a business with 12 employees. 3 of my employees are over the age of 65. It costs me over $1,200 per month per employee to cover them on my group medical plan. Can I move them to Medicare and a supplement because it is so much less in cost, and help them pay for Medicare and a supplement so I can reduce my overall costs?
Great question. Yes. As a matter of fact, remember we talked about under 19, 20.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So if you're under 19, you should definitely, this is how I built my business, Rob. I showed employers, small employers. Most of my employers are under 19 employees. I'm a small group broker. I told employers to do this. And as of 2016, in the Trump administration, he signed off on a law. Most CPAs don't know this, Rob. It'll blow your mind. Section 105, write this down. Section 105 allows an employer to set up a health reimbursement arrangement and pay for Medicare premiums and Medicare supplement premiums. They won't get a tax write-off for the premiums they're going to be saving, but look how much money they're going to be saving. Instead of paying $12,000 for my older people, I'm only going to pay $3,000 for my older people. I'm going to save $9,000 to $11,000 per senior. So that Lisa from Pittsburgh can save $30,000 to $35,000 a year just in healthcare premiums, because she's allowed to take care of Section 105, which allows you to pay for your employees' Medicare and their supplement. That's an excellent question.
Yeah, that's 105, 105H. They're really important because they cover HRAs, HSAs, medical reimbursement accounts, flex spending accounts. So let me ask you this question real quick, because we're going to wrap it up.
Sure.
And she forced them to do that?
Well, to be honest with you, you can when you're under 20.
Right. I'm just saying, Rick.
Think about it. You're not going to force anybody. Rob, you're my employee. I have a $1,000 deductible with an $8,000 out-of-pocket maximum, and you're paying $500, $600 a month to be on my healthcare plan. I got another option over here, Rob. It's going to cost you nothing, and everything's covered 100% after a $240 deductible. Do you want to go into that plan?
Yeah, good point. But if I'm over 19,
you're going to force them with common sense. But you can't do it if you have more than 20. Actually, an agent is allowed to coerce the employees. Employers are not allowed to.
Right. So the employer can induce or entice an employee, but can they say this? Can they say, okay, they have over 20 employees, and they say, this is completely voluntary, but you can stay on the group health plan here. But if you do want to go over on this side, I'll pay all of this, all of this, all of this. So you're going from paying $500 a month to paying $0. It's up to you what you want to do. Can an employer do that if they're over 20?
Not more than 20.
Can't even make it voluntary.
Can't even recommend it.
How about if I go to the employer and say, hey, Rick, I got a deal for you. I just learned this from watching this podcast with this Rick Solovsky guy. And how about if I go off the group health plan and I go on to this Medicare plan and you pay all those premiums? It'd be cheaper for you. Can the employee approach the employer, and can the employer do it?
Can. That's why if you have individuals, and we do, watching this podcast,
bingo,
you people out there, you go to your employer and say, you know what? I want to get off the group plan. They're going to love you.
Yeah.
And you know what? Set up this is between the employee and the employer. Make him an offer he can't refuse. Here's my Godfather motif, right? And tell them, hey, listen, I want you to gross up my salary and pay for my Medicare. There's no trail there, right? And nobody knows the difference. You make up your own side deals, but the employer cannot suggest any of that.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up this episode. Rick, thank you for your time. Thank you for your valuable insight. Sarah, thanks for managing our questions from our listeners across the country. I thank everybody for spending time with us and having us into your homes and businesses. And I hope you have a better understanding and the requirements of Medicare and what your rights and obligations are. That's key, because there's some obligations that can cost you money. And again, when you have the opportunity, please pay it forward. I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll see you on our next episode. Thank you for joining.
For information on this HVBA TV episode, please contact us at hvbatv@vbassociation.com.